Hi. How can Keir Starmer provide a nuanced approach to the Israel-Hamas conflict without losing one side or the other?
We've been talking about this over the last hour on the programme, in that he's had a meeting today with Muslim Labour MPs in the light of 150 Muslim Labour councillors resigning over his comments on the siege of Gaza. Ali Milani, as chair of the Labour Muslim Network, I imagine you have a view on this.
I do. I just want to say, first of all, 150 haven't resigned. They've written a letter. And
I thought they'd actually resigned from the party.
Now it's 250 councillors who have written a letter to Sir Keir Starmer asking for the party to adopt a position of an immediate ceasefire, which is not only we know the British population agrees with according to YouGov polls, but also we've heard it from everyone from the UN all the way to the Archbishop of Canterbury. I think this is a really, really good question, and the large parts is I'm really getting sick as someone who's Muslim and has received death threats in the last sort of 2 weeks as this issue has gone on, that we don't allow hate to take over our city, our communities, and we deal with what is a very, very difficult crisis, respectfully, openly, and morally. And I think the way to do that is to approach the issue honestly and with humanitarian law and international law in mind. I think the way that Sir Keir Starmer can do that is by acknowledging the call from Muslim community members today that an immediate ceasefire is the position that the party should now take, in line with human rights organisations, the UN, and the British public.
But he clearly doesn't believe that.
Well, I'm hoping he changes his mind. Look, the reality is we now have 200 hostages. We think around 200 hostages, which should be released. We've had 1,400 Israelis lose their lives tragically in a heinous terror attack. We also now have 1,000 Palestinian children who have died under rubble, nearly 6,000 Palestinian citizens who are dead now. And they bear no responsibility for what has happened over the last 2 weeks, and they bear no responsibility and have no power in what happens over the next 2 weeks. And so the release of the hostages is absolutely the right call. So is an immediate ceasefire.
Should that not be a precondition for a ceasefire, though? If the Israelis said, look, you release the hostages, we will have a ceasefire, surely that would seem to be most people to be equitable.
I don't know. Perhaps I don't know what the negotiations are taking place. It's difficult because we're so far removed from it. But the two things are absolutely linked. But the reality is, I mean, look, one of the biggest concerns that exist right now from a human perspective, even if you take the Muslim or Christian or any faith or none out of it, there are hospitals in Gaza right now where there are children in incubators that have hours until that incubator switches off. Right, that child isn't a hostage negotiator, nor do they have hostages. Turning off that incubator is a war crime. First of all, the denial of water, power, and essential supplies into Gaza, the cutting off and collective punishment is a war crime. But it's also wrong, and I think all communities can rally behind that. That it's wrong for that child to have to suffer and die.
But Hamas could immediately solve that by releasing the hostages.
But that child bears no responsibility to that, Iain. That child can't go talk to Hamas and say release the hostages. We're a democracy and we believe in international law and we believe in humanitarianism. I'll give you an example. It's like, imagine someone in London had committed or a group had committed the most heinous act on London. Nobody in their right mind would suggest starving London of food, of water, of cutting off its power supply, of allowing children to die in hospitals who bear no responsibility. They're not Hamas, and they bear no responsibility to that. That's a moral position. It's easy.
They don't. But
we don't have to be Palestinian.
But you're putting all of the moral responsibility on Israel here when it was Hamas who launched the terror attack in the first place and have got these hostages. And all they would have to do, at least to show a sign of goodwill, if nothing else, would be to release the hostages. And then I think there would be a huge pressure on the Israeli government to have a ceasefire.
Obviously, I'm not Hamas.
And I know, and I certainly wasn't implying that you.
I mean, if it was me, I would release the hostages. But what I'm saying is, it's not me, and it's not any of us. We're a liberal democracy. We believe in international law and humanitarian law, right? We believe in the value and the humanity of those hostages' lives, but we also believe in the value and humanity of all those innocent people. 6,000 dead under rubble. 1 in 20 buildings now flattened. Who can get? Who of any moral standing cannot call that out, not only as a war crime, but the wrong thing to do?
Rachel Shabbi, you and I used to be on a panel on a programme called CNN Talk, and I can remember talking about Jeremy Corbyn and anti-Semitism a lot on that programme at the time. Do you think that Keir Starmer's views on this are almost subliminally being guided by the need to rescue the Labour Party's reputation, which, to be fair, over the last 3 years, he's done on this issue, but now it seems to be in jeopardy again?
You know, I really would hope that he isn't doing that, because those two are completely separate things. And actually conflating those two things makes things worse, both in terms of his position on Israel-Gaza, which has been horrendous, and in terms of anti-Semitism, which would absolutely be worsened by him being subliminally guided by that, as you suggest. I think I don't know what he's being guided by, but what I know is definitely the case is that he has no moral backbone right now. And the people who he's listening to do not know what they're talking about. This is a really low bar. It really is. All we are saying is, can you just ask Israel to comply with humanitarian law and international law? And we're asking this of a guy who's a human rights lawyer, for crying out loud. If he cannot tell the difference, if he cannot summon the will right now to say, my understanding of human rights law and the basic rules of engagement is that you do not respond to a war crime with another war crime. And by the way, that answers the question you asked Ali. You do not starve people of water and fuel and food, commit a war crime, because a war crime has been committed against you. That is the basics of the engagement of the rule of law when it comes to war. And that's why that's not happening. And that's why that's a war crime for Israel to do that. And for Keir Starmer to not be able to say very clearly, that is a breach of humanitarian law. You have to call for a ceasefire, which, by the way, there's overwhelming majority British support for. You have to lift the siege on Gaza so humanitarian aid can go in. These are very basic things.
Do you think Egypt is committing a war crime, because they've effectively part of the siege on Gaza, aren't they?
Well, Egypt cannot. It's not able to decide whether Rafah is open or closed unless Israel says so. I mean, that's how that situation works.
Well, how does that work? Because it's the border with Egypt.
That's literally how the agreement with Israel works. That's literally how the agreement with Israel works. Seriously, they are not able. Look, if Egypt was able to decide to open Rafah, do you not think that for the last 2 weeks, that long queue of lorries with humanitarian aid that was trying to get into Gaza, do you not think that would have gone in by now? I
think the reason that Egypt has closed its border is because it doesn't want hundreds of thousands of refugees crossing into Egypt from Gaza. That's presumably why they closed it.
Come on, you could open a border to let lorries in and not let people out. I mean, this is basic stuff. Come on, Iain. The reason it doesn't want Gazans to go through Rafah to Egypt is because it fears that Israel will not let those Palestinians back into Gaza. It fears that there is a giant ethnic cleansing plan going on here, and rightly.
What a pity Egypt didn't want to take Gaza as a territory when it was offered it, but way back when. Well, we wouldn't have this situation for a start, would we?
No. Let's not impose weird scenarios. The reason we have
weird scenario. It happened.
The reason we have this situation is because we have an unequal. This is not like an equal battle between Palestinians and Israel. We have a situation where for over 50 years now, Palestinians have been under military occupation, and it is brutal. It is brutal every single day.
Okay,
right?
Well,
and that has got nothing to do with Egypt.
Because
that's got nothing to do with Egypt.
We can't go back to through the whole history of the Palestinian situation.
Maybe you should, Iain.
Well, we have done many times over the last couple of weeks, I can assure you. Stuart Jackson.
Well, I don't agree with the history, but I won't go. I mean, Egypt attacked Israel in 1967, and so Gaza has been a contested territory. Israel unilaterally left Gaza and left a functioning economy, utilities, infrastructure, education, hospitals. It was Hamas who decided to murder their opponent and have a totalitarian jihadist regime there, and is an existential threat to the people of Israel. And let's not repeat in this canard that Israel is breaking international law. The very eminent barrister Lord Vedarami last night demolished that argument in the debate in the Lords. He's an international law specialist. Israel is not breaking international law. My view is that to leave Hamas in place in Gaza will be a catastrophe for the Palestinian people. This is an absolutely appalling situation, but it is...
Can we go back to the question on Keir Starmer, though?
OK. I was just going to say, we have to think long term what's good for the Palestinian people as well as the Israeli people, and Hamas is not the answer to the question. In terms of Keir Starmer, ultimately he has to play to the national interest and not party interest. He's a serious politician. He aspires to be the Prime Minister. He has to think in terms of what is in the national interest, and he's got to steer away from this internecine post-Corbynist approach that identitarian politics means that he has to fall into line and attack Israel. I think he's taken a very moderate view. I think he is prepared to...
He's taken a more hardline view than Rishi Sunak.
Quite possibly. And I think you're right, Iain. I mean, you're an old cynic, of course, in politics. But, you know, he knows full well that people are watching him now and they're gauging whether he looks like a man that can stand on the steps of Number 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister. And it is a tough test for him, and it will be a difficult few weeks. But I think he's made the right call.
Cindy?
Yeah, I agree with much of what Stuart's just said as well. When it comes to, you know, Rachel, you raise a question of why Keir Starmer is doing this. I think it's not just the ghost of Corbyn, it's also the pressure of going into government possibly next year. The fact that this is the American position, and frankly, any prospective Prime Minister of this country needs to be looking at the American position on foreign policy issues, whether it's on Israel-Palestine or China or Russia, whatever it is. We might not like it, but frankly, that is the thing that we have to do as
When
a country.
did we become the 51st state?
That's kind of a separate question, and let's maybe not open that kind of...
I mean, that worked really well over Iraq and Afghanistan, didn't it? That was a great idea.
I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm just saying that, you know, if you want to be a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, you need to be on the same page as America, or at least as other Western developed countries. And actually, you know what? A lot of European countries have taken this strategy, have taken this position of not calling for a ceasefire, but of going to Israel and saying to Netanyahu, behind the scenes, you know, moderation, but no one is coming out to call for it. And I'm not talking about
the European Union did exactly that yesterday.
Sure, except well, but the European Union is also split on this question as well, by the way. So I just think it's, you know, from a political perspective, set aside the kind of the moral and the values here, because I, you know, completely cast down. I do not know enough about the situation, about the history involved here, to be able to opine and, you know, give an authoritative view on it. But on the political analysis, you know, that's why he's doing it. And I think it's a smart political strategy for them to be taking. You've already got a Labour Party which is confused on foreign policy. You know, you look at China, it doesn't really seem to have a position on China that's that much different. You've got David Lammy, your Foreign Secretary, who might be coming in, who actually campaigned against Donald Trump coming to London a few years ago, and Trump might be president next year. So from Labour Party's perspective, if you want to be a prospective government in waiting, this is really what you have to do. And I think the thing that will move the dial is if the situation eases up, is if Washington, which it looks like it might be doing, eases up its own position and says, you know, actually, Netanyahu, you've gone too far here. And, you know, that might happen. And that's an absolute cop-out.
I think the most fascinating thing about this whole thing is that Israel has not launched a ground invasion yet. I emphasise yet. Now, why is that? It must be because the Americans in particular, plus Britain and other countries, have urged Netanyahu not to do it,
100%.
which is an indication of his weakness in his political position as Prime Minister of Israel, something which we wouldn't have said maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, I think it's two things, Iain, if I may say. I think one is the actual logistics of a ground war is going to be very, very difficult, and the Israelis have been burnt in Lebanon.
Yeah, but they've had plans for this for years.
They have had plans, but, you know, street by street, ground fight is going to be very hard. The other thing is, politically, of course, they don't know what's going to happen. Even if they expunge the evil barbarians of Hamas out and start talking to the Palestinian representatives like Fatah, who may or may not want to be the government of Gaza, you know, they don't know where
they don't exist in Gaza, as I understand.
Well, they don't,
in any meaningful way.
But the point is, no one quite knows what the end game, the end political objective will be, and that's why you do need Qatar, the Saudis, the Egyptians, and others. You have a multilateral approach to try and solve this crisis.